Before we begin, remember this. Astravale was not a battlefield. It was humanity's proof that peace would work. But when the galaxy stopped watching, one child's voice revealed something far worse than war.
The transmission did not end with screaming. That was the first thing that felt wrong. Across Earth, billions had tuned in to Astor Vale's Peace Day broadcast, expecting the same quiet celebration they had seen every year. Children releasing silver lanterns into a soft alien sky, farmers laughing beside fields grown under a borrowed sun, a colony proving, again and again, that humanity could exist without war. The signal had been perfect. The music had been gentle. The governor had just begun her speech about trust when the sky above the colony went dark, not with storm clouds, but with shapes, silent, massive, deliberate. And then every channel in the galaxy cut out at once. Not flickered. Not distorted. Cut. Except one. Earth's emergency archive, an ancient system built long before the Concordat treaties, continued recording for exactly 11 seconds after every other network went silent. 11 seconds that no one could explain. 11 seconds that replayed now on every screen across Earth, over and over again, because no one could look away. There were no explosions in those 11 seconds. No chaos. No desperate running. The streets of Astor Vale were still filled with people standing exactly where they had been moments before, as if frozen between one breath and the next. Above them, the alien ships hovered like a second sky, their hulls swallowing the light, their presence so vast it seemed to press the air downward. Then the voice came. It did not come from the ships. It came from the ground. A child's voice, carried through the colony's public address system, clear and steady in a way no child's voice should have been in that moment. They told us to kneel. The camera shifted, not by choice but as if something else had taken control of it, tilting downward to show the crowd. And there, in perfect silence, thousands of humans, families, teachers, workers, children, were lowering themselves to their knees in unison, their faces lifted toward the sky not in defiance, not in panic, but in something far more unsettling. Obedience. The recording ended there. No gunfire. No screams. No final struggle. Just the image of humanity kneeling beneath something that had not even needed to ask twice. For a long time after, no one on Earth spoke. Not in the command halls, not in the crowded cities, not in the quiet homes where families still stared at the frozen frame of that child's face. It was not the absence of violence that unsettled them. It was the absence of resistance. The absence of everything humanity believed it had once been. Because every person watching understood the same thing at the same time. Astor Vale had followed every rule. They had disarmed because they were told to. They had trusted because they were told to. They had built a life around the idea that peace, once proven, would be protected. And in the final moment of that proof, when the sky turned against them, they had not fought. They had obeyed. The question that followed was not who had attacked.
So far, Astravale has gone silent. Humanity has seen its own people kneel beneath alien ships, and Earth's emergency archive has captured the only surviving proof. But the most terrifying question is no longer about the attackers. It is about why every other channel in the galaxy went dark at the same moment.
It was why the rest of the galaxy had stopped watching. Deep inside Earth's oldest archive facility, far below layers of systems no longer listed on any official map, a technician replayed the 11 seconds again, slower this time, frame by frame. There was something in the silence that did not belong. Something beneath the child's voice, too faint to hear at full speed, too precise to be interference. He isolated the audio, filtered it, listened, and felt his hands go still. Because beneath the child's words, buried so deep it had almost been erased, was another sound, measured, calm, unmistakably deliberate. That was the first conclusion the technician reached, not because of its tone, but because of its rhythm. It did not tremble. It did not hesitate. It did not react to the moment unfolding above it. It continued at the same precise interval, as if the massacre, or whatever had followed that silence, was irrelevant to its purpose. 7, 8, 9. The technician replayed the audio again, isolating frequencies, stripping away the ambient noise of wind and distant movement, until the counting sat alone in the dark space of his workstation speakers. It was clean. Too clean. No distortion. No background interference. Whatever had embedded that signal had done so intentionally. He sent the file up the chain. It came back marked, inconclusive. Archive error likely. No further action required. He stared at the response for a long time, reading it again and again, as if the words might change. They did not. They never did. Not anymore. Since Astor Vale went silent, every official response had begun to sound the same, careful, distant, and above all, incomplete. 3 hours later, the Galactic Concordat released its statement. It did not name the attackers. It did not acknowledge the kneeling. It did not explain why every monitoring relay in known space had gone offline at the exact same moment, except Earth's oldest system, a relic they had once demanded be dismantled and which Earth had quietly not. Instead, the statement described the event as a localized border escalation, a phrase so deliberately soft that it seemed to dissolve the reality of what billions had seen. They expressed deep concern, announced an investigative committee, and reminded all member species that unauthorized retaliation would violate Article 7 of the Accord. There was one line, buried near the end, that lingered longer than the rest. All member states are advised to remain calm and refrain from misinterpretation of incomplete data. On Earth, that line did not calm anyone, because the data did not feel incomplete. It felt cut. In the assembly hall, the human delegation stood in silence as the Concordat's ambassador delivered the statement in person, his voice smooth, his expression carefully neutral. He did not meet their eyes when he finished. He did not stay to answer questions. He simply closed his datapad, gave a small nod, and left the chamber as if nothing irreversible had just occurred. No one stopped him. Not because they agreed. Because they were still processing what had been taken from them. Astor Vale had not been just another colony. It had been the proof. The one place humanity pointed to whenever the older species questioned their place among the stars. No weapons. No warships. No hidden defenses. Just people building something fragile and calling it trust. Now it was gone. And the galaxy was pretending it wasn't. Hours turned into a day. Then 2. Then 3. No rescue fleet arrived. No confirmation of survivors. Only fragments of distorted telemetry drifting through space like echoes of something that had already been erased. The official channels insisted patience. Investigation took time. Clarity would come. But beneath those words, something else was beginning to surface. Quietly. Relentlessly. Inside the archive facility, the technician ignored the closure order and continued analyzing the 11 seconds. He expanded the timeline beyond the visible cutoff, digging into residual data that shouldn't have existed after the signal ended. There were gaps, massive ones, but between them, like cracks in a sealed surface, something had slipped through. Shapes of missing minutes. Not corrupted. Removed. He reconstructed what he could, aligning fragments, stabilizing frames, forcing coherence where there was none. The result was not clean footage. It was worse. It was partial truth. In one recovered frame, barely half a second long, the sky above Astor Vale looked different, not darker, but occupied in a way the official recording never showed. Not just warships, but smaller vessels positioned far beyond the colony's atmosphere. Observation craft. Not firing. Watching. In another fragment, a transmission log flashed briefly across the colony's command interface before vanishing again. It wasn't human. The format was older, standardized across Concordat systems. And it carried a designation code. Council Oversight Channel Active. The technician leaned back slowly, his pulse beginning to rise in a way that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with understanding. The galaxy had not missed Astor Vale. It had been there, watching, waiting. And when the first shots should have triggered a response, when the treaties should have meant something, when protection should have arrived, the channels had gone dark. He returned to the audio, isolating the second voice again. This time, he didn't focus on the counting itself. He focused on the intervals, the spacing between each number. There was a pattern there, subtle but consistent, like timing markers in a larger sequence. He mapped it against the recovered frames. The result made his breath catch. The counting aligned with the missing minutes. Not randomly. Precisely. As if whoever had embedded that voice had known exactly what would be removed, and had left behind a way to measure the absence. 10, 11:12. The technician stopped the playback. Because for the first time since Aster Vale fell silent, a different kind of question began to take shape. Not who attacked. Not why the galaxy had looked away. But something far more dangerous. Who had prepared for this to happen? And why had they hidden the proof inside humanity's oldest, most forbidden system? Behind him, deep within the archive's sealed layers, systems that had not been accessed in decades began to wake, one by one, responding to a signal that had never been meant to be found. And somewhere, far beyond the silence of Aster Vale, something else was still counting. The archive had not been designed to wake on its own. That was the first thing the technician understood as the systems around him began to shift, not with alarms or warnings, but with a quiet, deliberate reactivation that bypassed every visible control layer. Consoles that had remained dark for decades flickered to life. Storage banks, long sealed under obsolete protocols, began unlocking in sequence. It did not feel like a malfunction. It felt like recognition. He did not touch anything. For the first time since he started working in the archive, he realized he was no longer the one in control of it. On the central display, the recovered timeline from Aster Vale reassembled itself without his input. Missing segments filled in, not fully, not cleanly, but enough to reshape what he thought he understood. The 11 seconds of visible footage stretched into something longer, fractured by gaps but no longer empty. The counting resumed. 13, 14, 15. It was no longer just audio. Numbers began appearing across the reconstructed frames, faint overlays embedded into the visual data itself, marking points that had been cut out. Each number corresponded to a gap. Each gap held something that had been deliberately removed before the signal reached the public networks. Someone had not just recorded the truth. They had hidden a map of its absence. The technician leaned closer, scanning through the fragments. In one restored segment, the colony's command tower came into view, its upper levels still intact, its communication arrays glowing as they attempted to transmit beyond the blockade. Inside, silhouettes moved, fast, purposeful, not panicked. Not civilians. Another fragment resolved beside it, offset by seconds. A figure stood at the center of the command room, issuing orders. The resolution was too low to identify features, but the posture was unmistakable, controlled, precise, unshaken. The technician froze. Because that was not how the official narrative described Aster Vale. They had been told the colony was defenseless, unprepared. That what happened had been sudden, overwhelming, impossible to resist. But this suggested something else. Someone had expected the attack. Or at least, had not been surprised by it. He scrubbed forward. More fragments filled in. A transmission log flashed again, clearer this time. Multiple channels open. Not just civilian bands, but deeper frequencies, encrypted layers that should not have existed in a colony built under strict disarmament treaties. The designation codes repeated. Oversight channel. Observer link. External relay. And beneath them, one additional tag. Unregistered. Human origin. The technician's throat tightened. Aster Vale had been clean. That was the entire point. It had been inspected, verified, stripped of anything that could be considered a threat. Every system monitored, every output accounted for. That was how it earned its place as the model colony. So where had this signal come from? The answer surfaced before he could finish the question. Not from the colony. From somewhere deeper. He switched back to the audio and isolated the counting again, this time expanding the frequency range beyond what human hearing required. The pattern changed. Beneath the numbers, there was structure, layered signals moving in parallel, too complex to be accidental, too deliberate to be noise. It was not just counting. It was timing. A synchronization marker. He cross-referenced it with the archive's internal logs. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the system responded. A new interface opened on the central display, one he had never seen before, its design older than any current human architecture. No labels. No instructions. Just a single line of text forming slowly across the screen, as if the system itself was deciding whether to reveal it. Temporal discrepancy detected. The technician stared at it, his pulse beginning to climb. Discrepancy between what? The answer appeared in the form of two timelines. One labeled Public Record. The other, simply, Actual Sequence. They did not match. In the public record, the attack on Aster Vale began with the arrival of the alien fleet. Immediate escalation. Immediate loss. No response possible. In the actual sequence, the first shot came later. Much later. There was a gap, minutes long, between the arrival of the fleet and the beginning of the destruction. A window where nothing visible happened. A window that had been completely erased from every official version of the event. The technician felt a cold realization settle into place. Those minutes had mattered. More fragments resolved, pulled from the edges of corrupted data, forced into coherence by whatever system had just awakened. The command tower again. The same figure at the center. This time, a partial audio feed accompanied the image, distorted, broken, but enough to carry meaning. Channels open, all of them, let them hear. The voice cut out, replaced by static. Another fragment followed. If this fails, they need to know what this costs. Then silence again. The technician leaned back, his hands no longer steady. This was not a colony caught off guard. This was a colony that had made a choice. He returned to the timeline, focusing on the gap. The numbers continued to count across it, marking each missing second with relentless precision. 16, 17, 18. Whatever had happened in those erased minutes had been important enough for someone to hide, and important enough for someone else to make sure it could still be found. Behind him, deeper systems in the archive continued to come online, unlocking layers he had not even known existed. Data pathways rerouted. Access restrictions dissolved. It was as if the entire structure had been waiting for this exact moment, this exact discovery. He scrolled further. At the far edge of the reconstructed sequence, just before the visible 11 seconds began, one final fragment resolved into focus. Not from Aster Vale. From somewhere else. A transmission originating outside the colony system, routed through channels that bypassed Concordat oversight entirely. The signal was encrypted, but not beyond the archive's reach. It had been recorded, stored, and forgotten. Until now. He opened it. The screen flickered once. Then stabilized. A single line of text appeared, clear and unambiguous. Black Orchard Protocol, passive state compromised. The technician's breath caught. Because he had never heard of Black Orchard before. And yet, as the word settled into his mind, something deeper than memory stirred, a recognition that did not belong to him, but to the system around him. The archive was not just recording this. It was responding. 19, 20. The counting did not stop. And for the first time since Aster Vale fell silent, the technician understood that whatever had been set in motion that day had not ended with the colony. It had only just begun. They flickered once, then dissolved into a cascade of system prompts that the technician did not understand, not because they were complex, but because they did not belong to any known human interface standard. The archive was no longer displaying information for him. It was executing something. Deep beneath the facility, mechanical systems that had not moved in decades began to shift with slow, deliberate force. Sealed chambers unlocked. Data cores spun to life. Entire sections of the archive, once considered inert historical storage, revealed themselves to be active nodes in something far larger than a simple recording system. The technician stepped back from the console as the floor beneath him vibrated, not violently, not dangerously, but with the steady hum of machinery awakening after a very long sleep. He was not alone in the room anymore. Not physically. But the system had presence now. Intent. The central display reconfigured itself again, replacing the fragmented timeline of Aster Vale with something broader. Star maps layered over one another, shifting between known Concordat space and deeper, unregistered regions. Points of light pulsed across the map, some familiar, others entirely unknown. One cluster stood out. Aster Vale. Not marked as destroyed. Marked as triggered. The technician swallowed. Triggered what? Before the question could settle, another alert appeared, this one not from the archive, but from the global network above. Incoming transmission. Priority override. Origin. Galactic Concordat. He hesitated only a second before accepting it. The ambassador appeared again, but this time the careful neutrality was gone. His posture was rigid, his voice tighter than before, his words carrying a weight that had not been present in the earlier statement. "Earth," he began, not using the formal designation, not using titles, "you are advised to stand down all internal security escalations immediately. We are detecting unauthorized system activations across multiple classified infrastructures within your territory." The technician's gaze flicked back to the map behind him, where more points of light were beginning to pulse in synchrony. "Unauthorized," the ambassador continued. "Any attempt to mobilize unregistered assets will be considered a direct violation of Concordat law. You will cease all actions and submit to oversight pending investigation of the Astor Vale incident." The words sounded firm, controlled. But beneath them, something else slipped through, something the technician recognized now that he knew where to look. Fear. The feed cut abruptly, replaced by internal alerts cascading across the archive's interface. Not warnings. Confirmations. Node activation. Lunar deep vaults. Node activation. Oceanic substrate grid. Node activation. Outer belt relay systems. Each line appeared with the same quiet finality, as if they had been expected for a very long time. The technician's heart pounded as he realized what he was looking at. This was not a single system. This was a network. A network that had just come alive. The map zoomed outward, pulling back from Earth, from its orbit, from its immediate sphere of influence, revealing threads, faint, almost invisible connections stretching outward into the dark between stars. They linked to locations no one talked about anymore. Old mining stations. Abandoned research outposts. Regions marked as depleted or irrelevant. Dead places. Except they were not dead. They were waiting. A new transmission interrupted the display. Not from the Concordat. From within Earth. The assembly hall. The technician opened it without thinking. The chamber was full now, not with debate, but with silence. Representatives stood in place, their faces lit by the same data streams flooding every system across the planet. At the center, Earth's Secretary-General stood motionless, her gaze fixed not on the room, but on something beyond it. She did not look surprised. She looked resolved. A council aide approached her, voice shaking. "Madam Secretary, the Concordat is demanding immediate compliance. They're calling this an unlawful escalation. They're threatening." "I know what they're threatening," she said, her voice calm in a way that cut through the rising tension. The aide hesitated. "Then, what do we do?" For a moment, she did not answer. The room held its breath. Then she spoke, not loudly, not dramatically, but with a certainty that seemed to settle into the air itself. "We do what we should have done the moment Astor Vale went silent." The technician leaned closer to the screen, his pulse loud in his ears. "And that is?" the aide asked. The Secretary-General turned, her expression unreadable, her eyes carrying something older than anger, something colder than grief. "We stop asking for permission." The feed cut. Back in the archive, the map shifted again. The pulsing nodes synchronized, their light intensifying as if responding to her words. Data streams accelerated. Hidden pathways opened. Systems that had been dormant began exchanging information at speeds that bypassed every known network. The technician realized, with a growing sense of unease, that this was no longer contained to Earth. Signals were moving outward, fast, toward the stars. Another layer of the map resolved, this one highlighting a distant cluster of systems. St. Leora. The next colony. The technician's breath caught. Because the Concordat had said evacuation talks would take weeks. But the Black Orchard. It was already moving. The counting returned, louder now, no longer buried beneath the audio, but integrated into the system itself, echoing through the archive like a heartbeat. 21, 22, 23. He stared at the numbers, at the synchronization markers aligning with the expanding network, and for the first time, the pattern became clear. This was not a reaction. It was a schedule. A sequence that had been set long before Astor Vale fell. And whatever came next was not waiting for approval. It was waiting for zero. The first ship did not launch from Earth. That was the moment the galaxy truly began to misunderstand what was happening. Concordat sensors, still scrambling to track the sudden surge of human system activity, focused on Earth's orbit, expecting fleets, formations, visible escalation. Instead, they found nothing. No mass deployment. No conventional mobilization. Just the same quiet planet, its civilian infrastructure shifting into higher output, its networks moving faster than before, but outwardly unchanged. Then something moved in the dark. Far beyond Earth's immediate space, in a region marked for decades as depleted mining territory, an asteroid fractured, not from impact, not from explosion, but from within. Its outer shell split along clean, geometric seams, drifting apart in silence to reveal something that had never been listed in any Concordat registry. A ship. Not sleek, not ceremonial, not designed for display. It was built like a tool. Angular, unmarked, its surface absorbing light rather than reflecting it, its structure layered in a way that made it difficult to define where hull ended and internal systems began. It did not power up with a flare or a surge. It simply activated, as if it had been awake the entire time, waiting for permission to move. Across the map inside the archive, more points ignited. Dead moons. Ocean trenches. Orbital debris fields. Forgotten stations. They opened. One by one. The technician watched in silence as the Black Orchard revealed itself, not as a fleet, not as a single force, but as a distributed organism, each node independent, each unit capable of acting without central command. It had no flagship. No visible hierarchy. It did not gather. It unfolded. The Concordat's monitoring systems began to fail almost immediately. Not through attack. Through confusion. Navigation beacons shifted positions by fractions of a degree, small enough to go unnoticed at first, large enough to misalign long-range tracking. Communication relays experienced latency spikes, then delays, then silence. Entire sensor arrays reported conflicting data, each reading technically correct, but collectively impossible. Inside their own networks, something had begun to move. The Weavers. The technician recognized the pattern now, not from prior knowledge, but from the behavior itself. It was not brute force intrusion. It was adaptation. The system learned as it moved, reshaping pathways, redirecting signals, turning infrastructure into something that served a different purpose than it had been built for. The Concordat had banned this kind of intelligence generations ago. Earth had agreed. And then, quietly, Earth had built it anyway. Back in the assembly hall, the Secretary-General stood before a flood of incoming reports. The second colony, St. Leora, had just come into visual range of the same fleet that had erased Aster Vale. Their trajectory was identical. Their formation unchanged. Predictable. That was their first mistake. They're following the same pattern, a strategist said, his voice tight. Orbital lock in 12 hours. Surface engagement shortly after. We can still attempt diplomatic. No, she said. The room went still. No diplomacy, she repeated, not with anger, but with clarity. Not this time. A silence followed, heavier than before. Because everyone in that room understood what that meant. Not escalation. Choice. The Secretary-General turned slightly, her gaze settling on the live feed of St. Leora. The colony's surface looked peaceful from orbit, oceans reflecting distant starlight, cities glowing softly along the coastlines. No signs of panic yet. No awareness of what was coming. They think we're going to react the same way, she said quietly. Delay. Debate. Ask for permission to protect our own people. She paused. Let them think that. Back in the archive, the technician watched as the map shifted again, this time focusing not on Earth, but on the space between St. Leora and the incoming fleet. The Black Orchard nodes nearest to that region activated in sequence, their signals aligning with the counting that now pulsed through every system. 24, 25, 26. The numbers were no longer markers of what had been lost. They were timing what came next. The first human ship moved. It did not accelerate. It simply appeared closer. Not through faster engines, not through visible propulsion, but through a shift in position that bypassed the expected progression of space itself. One moment it was near the edge of the system. The next, it was inside the projected path of the alien fleet. The technician's breath caught. That wasn't possible. Or at least, it wasn't supposed to be. More ships followed, each one emerging from different vectors, converging without formation, without communication that could be detected, each movement precise enough to suggest coordination, but decentralized enough to make interception meaningless. The alien fleet did not react at first. Their sensors were still adjusting, still reconciling conflicting data, still trying to understand why their navigation systems were reporting positions that no longer matched reality. Then the first error appeared. A targeting system locked onto a human vessel. Then lost it. Then locked again, on empty space. Then on one of their own ships. The correction came too late. A single shot fired. Not from the humans. From within the fleet. The impact was immediate. One of the alien destroyers fractured along its central spine, its internal systems rupturing in a chain reaction that lit the surrounding space for a fraction of a second before collapsing into darkness. Silence followed. Not the absence of sound. The absence of understanding. The technician stared at the display, his mind struggling to catch up with what he had just witnessed. This wasn't an attack. Not in the way wars were supposed to begin. This was something else. A disruption so precise it forced the enemy to become the source of its own destruction. Back on St. Leora, the colony still did not know what was happening above them. They had not been told. Not yet. The Secretary-General watched the feed, her expression unchanged, her posture steady. "Keep the surface clear," she said. "No visible engagement." A strategist looked at her, confusion breaking through his composure. "Ma'am, if we don't show force, they won't understand." "They will," she said softly. He hesitated. "How?" Her gaze shifted, not to him, but to the data stream updating in real time, each new entry marking another failure within the enemy fleet. "Because they're already losing." The counting continued. 27, 28, 29. The technician felt it now, not just as sound, but as pressure, an inevitability building toward something he could not yet see but could no longer ignore. The Black Orchard was not revealing its full capability. Not yet. This was controlled, measured, deliberate, which raised a question far more unsettling than anything that had come before. If this was what humanity did when it chose restraint, what happened when it stopped choosing? The alien fleet did not understand what was happening. That was the only constant across every channel the Concordat could still access. Confusion spread faster than damage, not because the losses were insignificant, but because they made no sense within the framework the fleet had been built to operate under. Ships were not being overwhelmed. They were not being outgunned. They were failing. Systems misfired. Navigation drifted. Targeting arrays recalibrated toward empty coordinates, then toward allied vessels, then toward nothing at all. Entire squadrons began reporting phantom contacts, human ships that appeared for fractions of a second and then vanished, leaving behind only corrupted sensor logs and conflicting telemetry. Inside one of the command cruisers, an officer issued an order to fire. The weapons did not respond. He repeated the command. The system acknowledged it, then routed power to life support instead. Moments later, another ship in the formation executed a full firing sequence without command authorization, its weapons discharging into open space, then locking onto a nearby escort vessel as if it had always been the intended target. Panic did not arrive all at once. It crept in, measured, like something being allowed. From Earth, none of this was visible in the way war was supposed to be visible. There were no bright arcs of energy crossing the void, no massive collisions, no sweeping displays of force. The surface of St. Leora remained calm, its oceans undisturbed, its cities unaware that above them, the structure of an entire invading force was unraveling piece by piece. That was intentional. The Secretary-General watched the engagement from a secured chamber, her eyes moving across streams of data rather than images. She did not need visuals. The patterns were enough. Every disruption, every failure, every deviation from expected behavior formed a map far more precise than any battlefield display. "Status," she said. "Enemy formation integrity at 63% and falling," an analyst replied, his voice steady despite the pace of change. "Command relay cohesion degraded. We're detecting multiple attempts to regain centralized control, but the signals aren't reaching all units. Civilian exposure. 0. She nodded once. That was the line. Not spoken aloud, not written into any treaty, but understood by every system currently active within the Black Orchard. Civilian structures remained untouched. No spillover damage. No stray fire reaching the surface below. Every action above St. Leora was contained, controlled, and, most importantly, deliberate. The fleet above did not have that luxury. A cruiser attempted to break formation, its engines flaring as it angled away from the engagement zone. For a moment, it seemed to succeed. Its trajectory shifted. Its distance increased. Then its navigation system updated. Not incorrectly. Perfectly. According to its own internal data, it had never left formation at all. The correction snapped it back into alignment with the rest of the fleet, its engines cutting out mid-burn as if the decision to escape had never been made. The crew inside did not understand why their commands had changed. They only knew that they no longer controlled them. Across the fleet, similar events unfolded in staggered intervals. Ships moved, then unmoved. Orders were issued, then rewritten. Entire sequences of action collapsed into contradictions that no trained mind could resolve quickly enough to act. And always, beneath it all, something was watching. Learning. The Weavers did not simply interfere. They adapted. Each system they touched became part of the network, not through force, but through integration. They mapped every protocol, every failsafe, every hidden redundancy, and then used those structures against themselves. It was not an attack in the traditional sense. It was a conversion. Inside the archive, the technician followed the data flow as best he could, though it was already moving beyond his ability to track in real time. The map before him had shifted again, no longer showing individual nodes, but connections, threads of activity linking human assets to alien systems in ways that blurred the line between them. He saw the moment a hostile targeting array began operating under new parameters. He saw the instant a communications hub rerouted its output through a human relay. He saw the point where the distinction between attacker and target stopped being clear. And through it all, the counting continued. 30, 31, 32. It was closer now. Not in distance. In meaning. Back above St. Leora, the alien fleet made one final attempt to reassert control. A high-priority command signal surged through their network, originating from their central command vessel, broadcasting override codes meant to re-establish hierarchy and restore order. For a fraction of a second, it worked. Systems aligned. Targets stabilized. Weapons locked. Then the signal changed. Not interrupted. Changed. The override code continued to propagate, but its instructions were no longer what they had been when it was sent. Instead of re-establishing command, it redistributed it, splitting authority across multiple nodes, fragmenting decision-making, ensuring that no single entity within the fleet could act with certainty. The command vessel had just dismantled its own control structure. The realization hit too late to matter. One by one, the remaining ships ceased coordinated movement. Some powered down entirely. Others drifted, their systems locked in loops they could not break. A few attempted to flee, only to find their escape vectors leading them back into the same collapsing formation. The battle did not end with an explosion. It ended with stillness. A fleet designed to conquer had been reduced to a collection of isolated machines, each incapable of acting beyond the limits imposed by something they could neither see nor fight. From the surface, nothing had changed. The sky remained clear. The stars still shone. St. Leora continued its quiet existence, unaware that annihilation had come within reach and been quietly removed. In the assembly chamber, a silence settled that felt heavier than any victory. One of the advisors spoke, his voice low. "They're finished." The Secretary-General did not respond immediately. She was looking at something else. A new data stream. Not from St. Leora. From deeper space. From a direction no one had been watching until now. "They were never the only ones," she said. The room stilled. "What do you mean?" She turned slightly, her gaze sharp, focused. "Their fleet followed a pattern," she said. "Predictable. Repeatable." Her eyes moved back to the data. "This one won't." In the archive, the technician saw it at the same time. A new signal. Stronger. Faster. Not confused. Not disrupted. Approaching. The counting did not stop. 33, 34. And for the first time since the Black Orchard awakened, The system did not feel entirely in control of what was coming next. The new signal did not behave like the others. That was the first detail that separated it from everything the Black Orchard had already dismantled. It did not fracture under interference. It did not desynchronize. It did not adapt in a way that revealed weakness. It moved with a singular clarity, cutting through corrupted channels as if they were not there, its trajectory unaltered by the disruptions that had crippled the First Fleet. In the archive, the technician isolated its path. It was not heading toward St. Leora. It was heading toward Earth. The realization settled into the room like a physical weight. Every system that had been activated in response to Aster Vale had been focused outward, defending colonies, intercepting fleets, rewriting the battlefield before it could fully form. The assumption, unspoken but universal, had been that the enemy would continue to strike at the edges. They were wrong. This signal was not an attack in the traditional sense. It carried no weapon signature, no identifiable payload, no visible fleet escort. It was a transmission, compressed, encrypted, and moving at a velocity that suggested it had been prepared long before the first shot at Aster Vale had ever been fired. Prepared, and held in reserve. Back in the assembly chamber, the Secretary-General stood as the data fed into the central display. Analysts spoke over one another, their voices no longer steady. It's bypassing outer relay systems. Weavers are attempting interception, no effect. It's rewriting access permissions as it moves. How is it doing that? No one answered. Because the pattern was becoming clear. This was not a system reacting to interference. This was a system built to survive it. Origin? She asked. There was a pause. Then, quietly, Concordat Central Network. The room went still. Not a rogue empire. Not an isolated faction. Not even the species that had slaughtered Aster Vale. The Council itself. The same entity that had delayed response. That had called for patience. That had warned against retaliation. They had not just allowed the massacre. They had planned for what came after. The technician's hands tightened against the console as the archive attempted to parse the incoming signal. Layers of encryption unfolded, not through force, but through recognition. The Black Orchard did not break the code. It understood it. Fragments resolved. Partial strings of data aligned into something resembling language. Not a message. A directive. Containment sequence, escalation threshold exceeded. More lines followed, each one colder than the last. Human behavioral deviation beyond acceptable variance. Initiate corrective measure. The technician felt a chill move through him. This was not diplomacy. This was classification. Humanity had been observed, measured, and now it was being corrected. On the main display, a secondary feed activated without request. Recovered footage. Not from Aster Vale. From the missing minutes. The ones that had been cut. The command tower appeared again, clearer now, the distortion peeling away as the archive forced the data into coherence. Inside, the figure at the center of the room came into focus. Not fully, but enough to recognize the posture, the presence. Governor Ilara Ven. Alive. Issuing orders. All channels open, every frequency, let them hear this. An aide rushed toward her, panic in his voice. Governor, the Council is overriding our transmissions. They're cutting the feed. Then we send it deeper, she said. Her voice did not shake. They can control what the galaxy sees, she continued, her gaze fixed on the systems in front of her. But they cannot control what we remember. The feed stuttered. Another fragment. If this reaches Earth, they will know. This was never about us. The image distorted again, but not before something else appeared on the command interface, something the technician had not seen in the earlier fragments. An authorization prompt. Not from the colony. From Earth. Black Orchard access. Restricted. Governor Ven's hand hovered over it. For a moment, she hesitated. Not out of fear. Out of understanding. Because whatever she was about to do would not just expose the truth. It would trigger something. We followed their rules, she said softly, more to herself than anyone else. We trusted their system. Her hand lowered. Now they learn what that trust was protecting them from. The fragment cut. Back in the present, the incoming signal accelerated. The archive struggled to keep up, its systems pushing against limits they had not been designed to reach. The Weavers shifted focus, abandoning peripheral networks to concentrate entirely on the approaching directive, but even they could not fully halt its progress. It was not trying to infiltrate.
Now the truth is bigger than Astrovale. The Black Orchid has awakened. Saint Leora has been saved without the surface even knowing. And the Concordat itself has revealed a hidden failsafe. But this new signal is different. It is not attacking humanity's chips. It is reaching for humanity's ability to choose.
It was trying to overwrite. Across Earth, systems flickered. Not failures. Reassignments. Access permissions changed. Control hierarchies shifted. Infrastructure responded to commands that had not originated from any human authority. It was subtle at first, small adjustments, minor deviations, but the pattern was unmistakable. Something was attempting to take control. Not of weapons. Of decision-making itself. In the assembly chamber, the Secretary-General watched the data stream, her expression unreadable. "They built a failsafe," one of the advisors said, his voice hollow. "If we ever stepped outside their model, if we ever stopped being what they expected, they would correct us," she finished. Silence followed. Heavy. Final. Then she moved. Not toward the analysts. Not toward the communication systems. Toward a console that had remained inactive until now. Manual access. Unlinked from the network. Untouched by the incoming signal. She placed her hand against it, her gaze steady. "Status of Black Orchid core systems?" she asked. The technician answered before anyone else could, his voice carrying through a channel he did not remember opening. "Distributed nodes active. Network integrity holding. But the directive, it's targeting the core layer. If it reaches synchronization." "It won't," she said. Not as a hope. As a decision. The counting surged, louder than before, no longer confined to the archive, no longer hidden beneath layers of data. 35, 36, 37. The technician understood now. This was the endpoint. Not the destruction of a fleet. Not the defense of a colony. A choice. Humanity had been given a system. A structure. A place within the galaxy, defined by rules they had followed. Now that system was trying to take that place away. To redefine them. To control them. And for the first time since Aster Vale fell silent, the question was no longer what humanity would do to survive. It was what humanity would allow to continue existing. The Secretary-General's hand remained on the console. The room waited. The signal closed in. And the count did not stop. 38, 39. One number remained. 40. The number did not echo. It ended. And with it, something fundamental shifted. For a fraction of a second, every system on Earth, civilian, military, hidden, forgotten, paused in perfect stillness, as if the planet itself had taken a single, measured breath. The incoming Concordat directive, moments from full synchronization, hovered at the edge of completion, its control pathways threading into the deepest layers of human infrastructure. Then the Secretary-General made her choice. Her hand did not slam the console. She did not hesitate, did not look to anyone else for confirmation. The motion was small, precise, final. Execute full orchard. The words did not travel through the network. They didn't need to. The command had already been written long before she spoke it. Deep within the Black Orchid, a layer no external system had ever mapped activated, not as a response, but as a revelation. The network did not resist the incoming directive. It accepted it. For exactly one heartbeat. Long enough to understand it completely. Then it changed. Across the galaxy, every system carrying the Concordat signal began to behave correctly. Perfectly, even. The directive continued to propagate, its structure intact, its authority unquestioned by the networks it touched. But its purpose was no longer what it had been when it was sent. Instead of rewriting humanity, it began recording. Every command embedded within the directive, every classification tag, Every behavioral model assigned to human civilization unfolded into open transmission, no longer encrypted, no longer hidden. The system designed to control became a mirror, reflecting its own intent back across every channel it had tried to dominate. On worlds that had never questioned the Concordat, screens flickered to life. Data poured through them. Not edited statements. Not softened reports. Truth. Aster Vale, in full sequence, uncut, unaltered. The missing minutes restored. The council observers watching. The delay orders issued. The classification of humanity as a variable to be managed, corrected, contained. And beneath it all, the directive itself. Cold. Measured. Undeniable. On Earth, the incoming signal faltered. Not because it had been blocked. Because it had lost control of its own narrative. The Weavers did not destroy it. They translated it. Stripped it of intention. Left only evidence. In the assembly chamber, no one spoke as the feeds updated in real time. Across the galaxy, systems that had once carried authority now carried exposure. The Concordat's voice, once singular and absolute, fractured under the weight of its own design. "They're seeing everything," an analyst whispered. The Secretary-General did not look at him. She was watching something else. The endpoint. Far from Earth, deep within the Concordat's central network, the origin of the directive pulsed, its processes struggling to adapt to a situation it had not been built to anticipate. It attempted to reassert control, to shut down channels, to isolate nodes. It failed. Because the Black Orchard had never been centralized. There was no single point to target. No core to erase. It existed everywhere it needed to be. And nowhere it could be removed from. The correction sequence collapsed. Not in fire. Not in destruction. In irrelevance. The systems that had once defined the boundaries of galactic authority no longer held exclusive control over information. The structure remained. The council chambers still stood. The fleets still existed. But the illusion of control was gone. On St. Leora, the sky remained unchanged. On Aster Vale, where silence had once defined the end, something new began to emerge. Signals, faint, fragmented, but real, rose from beneath the surface, not of survivors, but of memory. The full archive of the colony, preserved through the same hidden systems that had carried the truth forward, began transmitting outward. Not as a warning. As a record. Every name. Every voice. Every moment that had been erased. Restored. Across the stars, species that had never understood humanity began to see something different. Not just the capacity for violence. Not just the ability to win. But the choice not to become what they had been forced to fight. In the assembly chamber, the Secretary-General finally spoke again, her voice carrying not through command channels, but through open broadcast. "We came to the stars in peace," she said, her tone steady, unshaken. "We followed every rule you gave us. We trusted the system you built." She paused. Not for effect. For clarity. Now you understand what that system was protecting you from. No threats followed. No declarations of dominance. Only silence. And in that silence, something far more powerful settled into place. Humanity had not burned the galaxy. Had not erased its enemies. Had not taken what it could have. It had drawn a line. And held it. Back in the archive, the technician sat motionless, the systems around him finally stabilizing, the endless flow of data slowing to something he could comprehend again. The counting was gone. The schedule had completed. For a moment, he allowed himself to breathe. Then the final update appeared on the screen. Not from the Concordat. Not from the Orchard. From the system itself. A simple line. Black Orchard Protocol. Active state maintained. He stared at it, the weight of its meaning settling in. Active. Not completed. Not finished. Maintained. His gaze drifted back to the restored footage of Aster Vale, to the child's face, to the moment before everything had changed. "They told us to kneel." The technician exhaled slowly. Because now, across the entire galaxy, there was no longer any doubt about the answer humanity had given. They had knelt once. They would not kneel again. And somewhere beyond the reach of every known system, beyond the boundaries of mapped space, Something that had been watching long before the Concordat ever existed registered the change. For the first time, it took notice.
This story is not just about revenge, it's about restraint, memory, and the danger of mistaking peace for weakness. Humanity did not win by becoming the monster. It won by exposing the truth, protecting Saint Leora, honoring Esther Vale, and proving one final thing to galaxy. Humans may kneel once, but they remember forever. Thank you.